At 4:27 a.m. local time, a U.S. Coast Guard surveillance radar locked onto an unidentified vessel slicing through the Western Caribbean at more than 45 knots. Within minutes, intelligence teams confirmed what they feared. This was a high-speed cartel runner loaded with nearly 3.95 tons of cocaine, worth over $60 million. The call went out from the Joint Interagency Task Force South Headquarters in Key West. Intercept immediately. From the air, maritime patrol sensors traced a narrow wake cutting across the dark sea. On the water, the cutter Diligence swung to intercept. Engines at full throttle, lights off, crew at battle stations. The operation was no longer a routine patrol. It was a race to stop one of the largest drug shipments ever caught in the Caribbean. Every second now mattered. One radar blip had become a national security alert, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a billion-dollar network was about to lose its cargo. When 4 tons of cocaine break into the open sea, how does America turn water into its battlefield? At 4:33 a.m., the order to intercept was transmitted through encrypted channels. Out on the dark Caribbean, the cutter USCGC Diligence powered up to maximum speed. Deck crews locked down lines, loaded the M240 mounts, and scanned the sea ahead. The radar screen showed the smuggler boat racing northwest at 45 knots, its hull almost invisible against the black water. The vessel's infrared glow, however, betrayed it. Engines running hot, 4 signatures visible on deck. Minutes later, a P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft appeared above the clouds, scanning the ocean's surface with synthetic aperture radar. Its sensors tracked the narrow wake and relayed live coordinates to Joint Interagency Task Force South. Inside, the Diligence's Combat Information Center displays updated every few seconds. Each adjustment of the smuggler's heading flashed on screen. The vessel was now heading west-northwest, possibly toward Panama's northern ridge, a route often used by cartel couriers avoiding shipping lanes. Heavy rain rolled in, breaking radar contact for a moment. For several tense seconds, the trace vanished in the noise. Then the Poseidon's radar reacquired it, confirming position 240 miles north of Panama. That confirmation changed the tempo. Diligence's engines surged to flank speed, and the chase became official. 2 MH-65 Dolphin helicopters maneuvered into the area, establishing an aerial perimeter. Their pilots switched to night vision tracking, identifying a thin plume of exhaust trailing from the go-fast boat. Meanwhile, the cutter followed the data trail, keeping the radar lock steady despite the swell. Every decision was timed to seconds. The mission had already transitioned from surveillance to pursuit. When the first international broadcast warning went out, the smugglers reacted instantly, not with surrender, but defiance. They increased throttle, cutting a wide arc through the waves and dumping cargo overboard to lighten the load. Then, in a move born of desperation, one crewman fired a flare across the sea, attempting to blind the pursuing helicopter's sensors. The flare burst into a cloud of white phosphorus, momentarily confusing the night vision optics. The Poseidon pilot adjusted altitude and regained visual contact. Below, Diligence recalculated intercept vectors. The smugglers were trying to drag the chase into a squall line where lightning would scramble radar returns. For a few minutes, the pursuit devolved into chaos, spray hammering the decks, radar screens flickering, and comms breaking under static. Yet the coordination held. AI-assisted targeting aboard Poseidon stabilized the tracking feed, and the cutter's systems filtered out false echoes until the blip reappeared, steady and clear. At 5:02 a.m., the captain ordered the intercept pattern. 2 RHIB fastboats launched from the stern, their engines screaming as they skimmed over the waves. Each carried a small boarding team armed with non-lethal suppression tools and line-throwing gear designed to disable propellers. The smugglers countered again. They released floating drums of oil and plastic debris behind them, creating a slick trap to slow pursuit. The first RHIB swerved violently to avoid collision, its hull shuddering as waves slammed against the bow. But training prevailed. The crews corrected course, reformed their pattern, and pressed forward under relentless rain. Lightning illuminated the scene. the gray speedboat twisting through walls of water, its crew reduced to silhouettes against the storm. Despite the chaos, Poseidon's radar maintained a lock and relayed continuous updates. The coordination between air and sea began to close the trap. When the distance dropped below 1,000 meters, Diligence executed the final maneuver. The cutter advanced on a converging course, while the RHIBS swung wide to starboard and port, boxing the smugglers in from both flanks. The ocean around them became a moving net. 3 vectors, 1 escape route. A disabling line was deployed. The steel cable whipped across the stern of the fleeing vessel, tangling the propellers. Sparks burst from the engines as they seized. The go-fast boat shuddered, lost momentum, and drifted helplessly under the weight of incoming waves. The boarding teams closed in fast. For a brief moment, tension hung thick. The suspects hesitated, one reaching toward a tarp, another freezing mid-motion. No one fired, but for a few seconds the deck felt on the edge of violence. Then the moment broke. The smugglers dropped to their knees, hands raised, as Coast Guardsmen climbed aboard, securing the vessel without a shot. On board, the air reeked of fuel, oil, and chemicals. Beneath the tarps lay tightly wrapped bricks marked with the Jaguar emblem, a symbol already known to intelligence analysts. Each package represented not only profit, but a signature of a larger organization. By 5:37, the Poseidon confirmed visual of the captured vessel surrounded by Coast Guard assets. Dawn broke over the Caribbean, revealing the aftermath in full view, a small gray boat encircled by ships and helicopters, proof that the sea could still be commanded through discipline and coordination. Inside Diligence's operations center, the outcome was logged with clinical precision. 1 vessel intercepted, 5 detainees, nearly 4 tons of cocaine seized. No casualties, no collateral damage, but as the ship turned north, a realization settled among the crew. If this was just one runner among dozens, the real battle was only beginning. If one boat carried nearly 4 tons of cocaine undetected for hundreds of miles, how many more were still out there waiting to test the edge of American waters? The captured vessel was a floating vault of evidence. After the sea settled and the engines fell silent, the boarding team secured every inch of the deck. The 5 men found on board, sunburned, exhausted, and visibly shaken, were placed under guard on the cutter Diligence. None spoke, and none needed to. The cargo told its own story. Inside the smuggler's hull, Coast Guard technicians worked under the glare of floodlights. They moved in deliberate patterns, cataloging, photographing, and sealing each package before transferring it to the evidence bay. Layers of waterproof tarps revealed neatly stacked cocaine bricks, each weighing about 1 kilogram, and stamped with a Jaguar emblem, a recurring mark traced to Colombian producers. The final weight confirmed the scale suspected from the start, nearly 4 tons. Every brick, every seal, and every GPS coordinate was logged in a chain of custody file. The process was clinical, but it carried the weight of strategy. Each package represented not only profit for cartels, but also a signal, proof of how far transnational networks had pushed their reach northward. Intelligence specialists aboard Diligence downloaded data from seized phones and navigation systems, uncovering coordinates of refueling points stretching from Panama to the Bahamas. By late morning, the seized vessel was hoisted into towing position. For the crew, this phase was almost as demanding as the chase itself. The sea remained unpredictable, and securing evidence at high humidity required precision to prevent contamination. Every crate was double sealed, cross-checked by a separate team, and labeled for transfer to federal agents awaiting at the next port. Over the radio network, confirmation flowed through command nodes. Operation complete, no casualties, contraband secured. The cutter maintained course toward Florida, escorted by a support ship carrying forensic teams and security personnel. Above deck, the sun burned through the clouds, lighting the pale blocks of cocaine stacked under tarps, a stark image of order imposed on chaos. What began as a flicker on a radar screen had turned into one of the largest narcotic seizures in the Caribbean this year. But the investigation wasn't over. The data gathered from the smugglers' devices pointed toward a broader structure, a supply chain that didn't end in Panama or Jamaica, but much farther north. Because the true discovery wasn't the cocaine itself, it was what those coordinates revealed about a new, hidden route into the United States. But when government analysts began tracing the coordinates inside those seized phones, the story expanded far beyond a single boat. What began as a high-speed chase soon turned into an intelligence windfall. Once the cocaine was secured aboard Diligence, analysts downloaded every byte of data from the smugglers' phones, GPS units, and satellite trackers. Coordinates, fuel logs, and encrypted calls formed a trail across the Caribbean. The evidence revealed something far larger than one lucky interception. It was a supply corridor stretching from Colombia to Florida, active for months and supported by multiple crews. Each route was marked by refueling points, safe islands, and relay vessels, all synchronized to deliver tons of narcotics northward under the radar of conventional patrols. From the digital trail recovered at sea, a map began to take shape. Intelligence teams in Key West overlaid GPS coordinates from the captured devices with maritime radar archives and satellite imagery gathered over several months. The result exposed a long, thin artery of movement across the Caribbean, a pattern invisible to civilian eyes, but unmistakable to trained analysts. Every dot on the chart told a story. The first cluster appeared along Colombia's northern coastline near Barranquilla, where motherships loaded with fuel and sealed containers prepared the runs. Farther north, a series of short stops marked refueling points off Panama and the San Andres archipelago. Each vessel traveled at roughly 45 knots, using low radar profiles and blackout navigation to slip between commercial lanes. Between August and September, at least 3 separate routes followed the same geometry, crossing Jamaica's western edge, passing close to the Caymans, and ending in a shallow arc toward the Bahamas. The pattern matched earlier Coast Guard interceptions. One on August 7th southwest of Negril, where a go-fast carrying 1,500 pounds of marijuana was seized. Another on September 6th, where over 4 tons of cocaine were captured north of Panama. Those 2 events were not isolated. They were part of this same grid. Each stop corresponded with a logistics node, a hidden cove, a fishing dock, sometimes a local charter vessel used for cover. The timing between points was nearly exact, suggesting a coordinated timetable managed remotely. Analysts discovered that phone pings aligned with refueling windows as if controlled by an unseen dispatcher. This was not a handful of traffickers gambling on luck. It was a disciplined network functioning with military precision. When the mapping was complete, one conclusion became impossible to ignore. The Caribbean was no longer a scattering of random smuggling attempts. It had become a corridor, a maritime highway connecting South American production zones directly to U.S. shores, and the captured data from Diligence had just exposed its blueprint. The investigation deepened once analysts cross-referenced maritime coordinates with domestic law enforcement reports. What they found linked the Caribbean corridor directly to Florida's east coast. In Fort Pierce, federal agents had recently dismantled a parallel operation that mirrored the sea routes uncovered from the Diligence case. That network involved 4 small boats arriving from the Bahamas, each carrying a mix of contraband and migrants, 30 Chinese nationals, 5 Bahamian crew members, and 2 children hidden among them. Alongside the passengers were 370 pounds of cocaine, sealed in similar Jaguar-marked packages to those seized offshore. The logistical center behind it all turned out to be an Airbnb apartment rented under false identification near the Fort Pierce Marina. Inside, investigators found satellite phones, marine charts, and a wall covered with shipping schedules. The unit operated like a miniature control room, where schedules for each crossing were coordinated to avoid Coast Guard patrol windows. Payments from migrants were processed through encrypted messaging apps and digital wallets routed through offshore intermediaries. Financial analysis estimated that each migrant had paid up to $30,000 for passage, a price that, multiplied across multiple voyages, pushed profits into the multi-million range. By combining human smuggling with narcotics transport, the syndicate maximized revenue while dispersing risk. The human cargo provided a facade of desperation, reducing suspicion during random inspections, while cocaine shipments hidden among luggage guaranteed high margins. The Fort Pierce raids led to over 30 arrests, including intermediaries who handled refueling in the Bahamas and couriers based in Miami. Interrogations revealed that these groups reported to the same coordinators traced through Diligence's seized phones. In essence, the cocaine captured in the Caribbean and the migrants rescued off Florida were part of a single enterprise, a hybrid network moving both people and drugs under one operational umbrella. For investigators, it confirmed an uncomfortable truth. The boundary between human smuggling and narcotics trafficking had disappeared, replaced by a single transnational business model optimized for profit and invisibility. As agents pieced together the hierarchy, the structure resembled a multinational company more than a criminal ring. At its foundation were producers in northern Colombia, operating jungle labs near river ports, where cocaine paste was refined and pressed into bricks. From there, brokers in Panama and Jamaica handled transport logistics, chartering local fishermen, paying bribes at refueling docks, and renting motherships for deep-sea transfers. Each link in the chain had its own specialization. The Bahamas crews managed short-haul navigation through island channels, taking advantage of shallow reefs where larger patrol vessels couldn't maneuver. In Florida, onshore coordinators, like those operating out of the Fort Pierce Airbnb, received deliveries and handled domestic distribution through shell import firms and trucking companies. The profits were dispersed through layers of small transactions, laundered via Hawala-style remittances, wire transfers, and cryptocurrency wallets opened under false names. What emerged wasn't a handful of traffickers, but a logistics empire, armed with encrypted communications, satellite relays, and the discipline of a paramilitary fleet. It operated more like a navy than a gang, with coded channels, layered command, and strict coordination across thousands of miles of open water. Intelligence assessments valued a single completed route at over $70 million in potential revenue, factoring both narcotics and migration fees. The margins were vast, and losses from seizures like Diligence's barely registered. One boat out of 10 was considered acceptable risk. To sustain operations, cartel financiers reinvested in faster engines, encrypted radios, and local front businesses, blurring the line between commerce and crime. What emerged was not a scattered group of smugglers, but a regional logistics empire with layered command, redundancy, and disciplined timing. A system that could be disrupted, but not yet destroyed. The Coast Guard's success had pulled back the curtain, but the machinery beneath it still turned. Behind every intercepted shipment lay a strategic adaptation. Cartels had learned that land borders once porous were now watched by drones, sensors, and rapid response patrols. Crossing the Rio Grande had become an expensive gamble, while maritime routes remained vast and thinly patrolled. The Caribbean, with its maze of islands and unmonitored coves, offered the perfect alternative, a frontier that no wall could block. Smuggling by sea demanded investment, but offered precision. Go-fast boats, powered by triple outboards, could maintain speeds of 40 to 50 knots while staying below conventional radar thresholds. Some were coated with radar-absorbent paint. Others carried detachable fuel tanks to extend range beyond 400 nautical miles. With spotters using encrypted satellite phones from the shore, the convoys moved only during moonless nights, timing runs between commercial traffic lanes to mask their signatures. The advantage was clear: fewer checkpoints, faster transit, and limited visibility to authorities. But the shift also changed the nature of U.S. enforcement. Every mile of coastline, from Puerto Rico to the Florida Keys, became a potential breach point. For the Coast Guard, the task evolved from border control to open ocean interdiction, requiring the same coordination and precision as naval combat. In the new geography of smuggling, the battlefield wasn't a desert crossing or a jungle path. It was the open sea, an expanse where radar, intelligence, and discipline decided who ruled the horizon. If every route is a risk, how far will America go to close them all? Washington's answer was speed and integration. Within weeks of the Diligence seizure, the Joint Interagency Task Force South expanded its surveillance net across the Caribbean arc. Coast Guard cutters began operating alongside Navy destroyers and P-8 patrol aircraft, supported by drones relaying continuous radar sweeps back to Key West. What once functioned as isolated enforcement now resembled a coordinated naval grid, military in efficiency, civilian in mandate. New technologies made detection faster. Artificial intelligence algorithms compared radar echoes to known go-fast patterns, while infrared sensors identified heat blooms invisible to the naked eye. Intelligence sharing with Panama, Jamaica, and the Bahamas improved interception times by nearly half. On land, the DEA and Homeland Security built joint task forces to trace cartel financing, freezing digital transfers before they reached offshore banks. Each successful seizure no longer ended at the dock. It triggered forensic tracking, asset confiscations, and extradition requests. The result was an ecosystem of response: air, sea, and cyber operations linked under one chain of command. It wasn't a war declared in words, but in coordination, a silent campaign turning America's law enforcement network into a standing maritime shield. And when that shield finally brought the cocaine to shore, it wasn't the drugs that drew headlines, but what the offload revealed to the world. When the Diligence finally docked at St. Petersburg, Florida, the scene looked less like a routine seizure and more like a national demonstration. Under armed guard, 8,700 pounds of cocaine, valued at over $64 million, were lifted from the cutter's hold and stacked in neat white towers beneath the morning sun. The display wasn't for spectacle, it was a statement. Cameras rolled as Coast Guard, DEA, and Homeland Security officials stood side by side, proof that coordination could reach beyond borders and bureaucracies. Because when those crates touched American soil, they carried more than evidence. They carried a message. The ocean was no longer the cartel's safe passage. By the time the Diligence completed its journey north, word of the seizure had already spread across every major federal agency. The Coast Guard pier in St. Petersburg, Florida, had transformed overnight into a stage of discipline and proof. As the sun rose, cranes lifted sealed containers one by one, each marked with the Coast Guard insignia and the serial numbers from the Caribbean interception. The air smelled faintly of fuel and salt, but what dominated the dock was order, rows of uniformed personnel, precision, and silence. The verified tally was staggering: over 8,000 pounds of cocaine, valued at more than $64 million. Each crate marked a point on the map erased from cartel control. For the officers who had tracked the operation from its first radar pulse, the offload wasn't simply closure, it was proof that coordination works, that intelligence, patience, and endurance could overwhelm even the most sophisticated networks of narco-terrorism. Standing near the stacked cargo, Commander Colin McKee, the commanding officer of Diligence, supervised the transfer to federal custody. His team had spent weeks at sea, navigating storms and narrow margins to make this moment possible. Behind them, the Joint Interagency Task Force South, the DEA and Homeland Security representatives stood in formation, each one a link in a chain that had functioned exactly as intended. The offload was deliberately public. For Washington, this was both an announcement and a warning. The Coast Guard's message was simple: the Caribbean may still be vast, but it is no longer invisible. Every ton seized on the water prevents millions of doses from reaching U.S. cities, and every captured vessel reveals another layer of the global financial machine that fuels organized crime. Reporters watched from a distance as the white blocks were stacked in precise columns for inventory. When weighed together, The mass exceeded the payload of a small aircraft. What began as a flicker on a radar screen had become a monument of interdiction. Evidence that the United States can still command the sea through discipline rather than spectacle. The Coast Guard's cutters are smaller than destroyers and slower than fighter jets, yet their victories echo far beyond their size. Each successful seizure reinforces the quiet doctrine that defines America's maritime defense: control, containment, and persistence. As the last crate was sealed and transferred to investigators, the message spread beyond the dockyards, to allies, rivals, and those still testing U.S. waters. And if you believe in the men and women who guard that horizon, stay with us. Subscribe to Military Power, where we uncover the weapons, strategies, and unseen missions that keep America's front lines secure. See you next time.